Hello, friends. I'm Andrea Morris, and welcome to another episode of Spill the Wine, a podcast which, is all about wine. And today we're going to have a really fun journey because we're actually not at a small lot winery today. We're at one of the larger wineries in the Bench area. And again, a place that I've been to very often, Cave Springs, where full disclosure, I am a wine club member here. So now you know how much I like their wines. We're sitting with Len today, and thank you very much for being here.
Oh, welcome. Good to have you here.
Yes, and good to be in the tasting room. Now, you're one of the few wineries in the area that actually has multiple locations. You have two wineries, two locations.
Two tasting rooms,
Yeah.
This one here in Jordan, which is where we make the wine. So the winemaking is occurring at the other end of the building right now as we speak. We have Riesling coming in today. And so the wine is made here, but we like to say that you don't make wine, you grow it. And we grow our wine on Cave Spring Road in Beamsville, not far from where you live. And that is, in that location, we also have a tasting room. So vineyard in one location, winemaking in another location, tasting room in each location.
And what made you decide to actually open up the vineyard as another tasting room?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because our problem for decades, literally, because we've been here since 1987 in Jordan. We've always been associated with Jordan. It was kind of like an urban setting or, village setting. But we have 170 acres of vineyards in Beamsville, all in one place on the bench there. And nobody knew it because they always came here. Our identity was associated more with this place than with that site up there where we like to say we grow our wine, and that's where we grow it. Our name is Cave Spring because our vineyards are located on that road. So I mean, the point is that our vineyards are located there, and for us, that's Cave Spring. That is our heart and soul, where we grow the grapes. Here we make the wine. It's a lovely spot. It's got a great facility for making wine. This is an old building that was a winery, has been a winery for literally close to 200 years, and so it's an appropriate place to be making wine. But we grow it up there.
But it's also nice to have the option to come to a place, to the tasting room here in Jordan, where you make the wine, but then to also have the ability to go and just sit and look at the beautiful surroundings at the vineyards.
Yeah.
And it's nice that you have that choice.
Well, we never had it before. Now we do. It's only been a few years since we've had that facility up there, and we're so thrilled finally to be able to showcase that beautiful spot because it's always been where our wines came from, but not very many people knew that until we finally had a place up there to showcase.
It's great, and I really enjoy it there because I can actually walk there,
Right?
Which is a bonus for me. But but listener, if you've got to come out here and visit it and see it, and many weddings take place in that area as well. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today too, Len, is because one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast is because so many people come out to visit me, and when I say, let's go to a winery, they go, well, I don't know anything about wine. And what are your thoughts on the fact that people seem to think that wine is one of the few beverages that you can't enjoy unless you know something about?
Yeah, that's, as I said earlier, we did it to ourselves as an industry. I mean, you mentioned beer, and people aren't intimidated by beer. Happy to go to a craft brewery and just figure out what's on tap and enjoy it. The history of our industry has really been an aristocratic history in Europe, especially where these famous vineyards owned by aristocrats, the whole formality associated with wine, and the idea that you had to know in order just to try the beverage, you had to know about the places, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Chianti, wherever, and
Champagne,
all of those places were considered very high-class aristocratic type places, and therefore not accessible to the ordinary consumer. And that legacy has lived on in our industry. And we tend to talk about so many really arcane and unusual topics that people don't relate to. They don't understand about grape growing or vine trellising or all the things that go into making a wine. But as winery people, that's what we do. We start talking about very technical stuff that ordinary consumers just don't understand, and they find that intimidating. We should really stop doing it that way. We should be just making wine accessible and inviting and allow people to enjoy it the way they do any other beverage.
But I think that also comes with the turf with any industry that you're in, because when I first started working in the music industry years ago, people were throwing around terminology that I had no idea what they were talking about. So I think that you just, when you're in an industry for a long time, all of that lingo just becomes like second nature, and you forget that it's intimidating to someone that's walked into a winery for the first time.
Exactly. And so we need to remind ourselves every day that ordinary people don't understand the language and all of the technicalities that we take for granted. And so I think that's something we need to do more of. And we've gotten better. We have tasting rooms like this, and we learned the hospitality aspect of our business. I think we do a far better job than we used to. I mean, there was a time when you couldn't even visit a tasting room anywhere in Niagara. There were wineries, but the idea that tourists would come in and actually be able to taste the product was foreign.
Really?
Yeah, and that was true also in Europe. Places like Bordeaux and Burgundy, only the invited were allowed to come in and taste, because these were hallowed places, chateau, and as I said, aristocratic. Not everybody in the world could just drop in and taste, Chateau Petrus or whatever in any of these famous wine regions, and that became the norm. That was the norm for many, literally centuries, I would say.
And now we've evolved to bus tours and bachelorette parties at wineries,
exactly.
and people making it much more accessible.
So we're getting there, but we still have. We also celebrate, sommeliers. I mean, have you heard of a beer sommelier or a spirit sommelier? You don't really hear about, but the idea that you're a sommelier, you're someone who's studied wine, you've gone through various levels of expertise. That's your calling card. That's a kind of badge of honor in the wine business. That is also a barrier for ordinary consumers, right? Because because you sort of signal that there are experts and then there's everybody else. And
right.
That's not a good way to invite people into the category.
You're top tier if you're a sommelier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't, and the Somms, of course, they have all the language and the technical stuff, like you were saying about the music business. When they start talking that way, of course, they lose ordinary people because they just don't understand. And then they get intimidated. They worry that, how do I hold a glass? Should I be putting my nose right in the glass? Or, they need to be told very simple things. And then suddenly it's no longer, some way that they're going to be embarrassed, that they realize that they can just be themselves.
Instead of being self-conscious about, this is wine and I don't know what I'm doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When did you first open the tasting room here in Jordan?
Here in Jordan was the year we opened our winery, which was 1987. I guess we made our first wine in 86 and we opened the tasting room in 87.
Now, is Cave Springs a family-run business?
Oh, yes, of course. It has been from the beginning. Yeah. The winery started in that year in 86, that first vintage. But we were growing grapes prior to that, always at the Cave Spring site. And that started in the early 70s. So our vineyard there was one of the very first plantings of Vitis vinifera in Niagara. That was a period when the industry was very different, based on native North American grape varieties like Concord, Niagara, Fredonia, terrible wines. And so, we were really in the vanguard of that first generation of wineries that elevated the grape growing aspect of the business. And so for about 10 or 15 years prior to opening the winery, I was a grape grower. I was figuring out how to grow the grapes that we now take for granted here in Niagara. And
how many wines did they first release on the first, when you guys first opened as a winery for tastings?
Here at Cave Spring, we our first vintage, we made 500 cases of Riesling and a smattering, like demi-johns, literally, like home winemakers would, of Chardonnay and Gamay. That was it. So we probably not under 1,000 cases in the first vintage.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then it grew from there.
Right. But we had more vineyards more capacity in our vineyards than we had in the winery. So we started small, and I continued to sell grapes right through to I think the early '90s, because we had more grapes in our vineyards than we had sales in the winery for all those grapes. So I used to sell grapes in Cleveland, if you can believe that.
Yay!
There's a crazy doctor who loved to make wine. He had a little bistro. Tom Wyckoff was his name. Anyway, so I was selling grapes because they were so novel in those days. There were a lot of there was demand, and on the other side of the border, a lot of new small wineries opening up, but they couldn't get their hands on Chardonnay, Riesling, and so on. And so I ended up selling quite a bit over there.
There's a winery. My family lives in Vermilion, Ohio, and there's a winery there that's actually they spent years planting, and had been bringing grapes in from everywhere else, and now they decided that they pulled all their vines because the deer kept eating them.
Oh, really? Is Vermilion along the Lake Erie shoreline?
Yeah,
that's where most of the industry is.
Yeah, there's quite a few wineries out in that area.
I know.
Yeah. We'll have to eventually move the podcast to Ohio and do some Ohio wineries. But first we'll concentrate on the home turf here. And you talked about Riesling as one of the first grapes and the first wines that you made. Is the first thing we're going to start tasting today is a bubbly. Is this a sparkling Riesling?
No, this one is sparkling Chardonnay.
Well, that's okay.
We do make a Riesling, but we most of our sparkling wine is Chardonnay is the base. Chardonnay, of course, is also the base of most Champagne. The grapes that are used in Champagne are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and a little bit of Pinot Meunier. Those are the three main varieties in Champagne. So we experimented with many different varieties, but we've settled on Chardonnay for our primary production of sparkling wine, because it just is a real natural, and it gives the kind of complexity that people just love in Champagne, and so that it's our go-to grape for sparkling. But we do a Riesling. We're now doing a rosé made from Gamay as well.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. We did an earlier podcast episode where we were at Via Romano and had their Lambrusco.
Oh yeah.
Which they can't call that.
Right.
Because of the region. But that was the first time I'd had that in ages. It was just really refreshing.
It's coming back.
Yeah.
As a category in Italy. That the little bit of spritz and red. So that's the nice thing about wine. There's so many diverse regions and products, and always something interesting to explore or try here, for example.
Yeah. I really am enjoying this. It's very easy drinking. The bubbles are very delicate. That's
the key with bottle fermented. So that's the classic method. So the wine is fermented in the bottle, as opposed to in a tank, which is the Prosecco method. And it really shows in the size of the bubbles for sure, and just the great texture of the wine and the mouthfeel and the ageability of it. I mean, this wine will improve with bottle age. I mean, we leave it for roughly 3 years on the lees. That adds that layer of complexity, a sort of texture that you feel on your tongue, and the descriptors that are often used are things like toast and nuttiness, yeastiness. Those are all characters that come through in a bottle fermented wine like this.
And is it because is it the traditional method where you're turning it?
Yeah, well, that turning of the bottle is now done in a mechanical system that gradually tilts a cage of a whole bunch of bottles all at the same time. Most of that occurs mechanically today. I mean, although that rack behind you is the traditional way of doing, or this rack right here, these bottles are upside down, and so the idea in the old days was every so often you make a quarter turn to try to get the lees. Because remember, we inoculate each bottle with some yeast, and the yeast begins a fermentation. Fermentation creates the CO2 or the spritz in the wine, and then that gets captured inside each bottle. But because of all that occurring in the bottle, you get all this turbidity, and all the sediment that is generated by that process. So you have to get it out of the bottle. And that's done, in the old days, it was done by these occasional quarter turns, having the bottle upside down until all the sediment ends up in the neck of the bottle. And when you get it to that location, then what you do is you put it, immerse it in a fluid that will freeze it. So that little bit of sediment, we call it a plug, in the neck of the bottle. After that long process of riddling, it's called, it's frozen, and then the bottle itself the closure is what we call a crown cap, which is like a beer cap. And so the bottling line that does all this begins by leaving the bottle upside down, freezing the neck so that all of that sediment that's now in the neck is congealed in the form of ice. So, and the cap is removed. The pressure from the fermentation, the pressure of the CO2 in the bottle pops that thing out automatically. And then the machine immediately puts the cork in so that you don't lose the liquid. You just eject the plug of sediment and immediately put the cork in, and you have a finished product.
That's really cool. This is the first time I've heard that story. So that's really interesting.
That's how it's made. That's how, and that was the method of Dom Perignon. The French claim it was Dom Perignon. The Italians have their own monk who they say, was ahead of Dom Perignon by whatever number of years. But that method was discovered, in effect, probably by happenstance.
Wow.
They realized that the trick was to capture the fermentation in a single bottle, and then obviously get rid of the sediment that's created by fermentation in the way I just described.
Yeah.
And then the finished product is this glorious product because because that liquid has been sitting on those lees for all that time. The process of riddling only occurs at the very end of the process. For 3 years, the wine just sits on its side with all of that sediment in the bottle. That's adding complexity to the flavor of the finished product. And then at the end, you riddle it, and you cork it, get rid of the crown cap, and put a cork in, and now you have the finished product.
So how long do you riddle it for?
Riddling can occur in the old days. It would be for probably weeks or months as they put bottles into the rack and then just do that quarter turn thing. In these days, with what's called a gyropalette, the French invented it, of course. It's a big cage with bottles all oriented the same way, and it gradually, over time, turns ever so slowly so that all the sediment ends up in the necks of all these bottles collected in one big cage. And then once they're upside down completely, it's a matter of, I think, maybe a week or two.
Wow. And
then you get all that sediment in the neck, and then you're ready to put it on the bottling line. And it's a fascinating thing to see. If you get a chance, go and have a look at sparkling wine being bottled. You see that plug getting ejected. You see it all happens so fast. It has to, right? Otherwise, you lose the liquid. And so it all happens so fast, and suddenly you go from a crown cap to a cork with the wire that holds the cork in place, all done almost instantaneously.
And the result is
this, which is so much more complex and interesting than the tank version of the same thing.
I think I'll actually enjoy it more now, knowing so much more about the process, because I find it really fascinating.
Remember where we started. In this case, it is interesting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so people who don't know, and why would you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty technical thing.
Yeah.
How many people have been to a bottling room where they're bottling champagne or sparkling wine? So, but it does. What I like to talk about it because it underscores just how complicated. Just how this is one unique product. Each bottle fermented on its own is subtly different from the next bottle. They're all made at the same time. They all come from the same place. But each individual bottle has its own fermentation. And that's what you're tasting. You're tasting that individual fermentation.
It makes me so much more appreciative of the work that goes into it.
Right.
And it also explains when people sometimes, bitch about the prices of wine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just hearing all of the effort that goes into that.
Exactly.
To me, it makes it justify.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So what's called the Charmat method or the Prosecco method, where that same thing happens in a tank, but you don't get that long period of sitting on the lees and absorbing all those flavors from the dead yeast and all the rest. But it's still at least fermentation in a vessel and then bottled. That's sort of second best. And then the least desirable, of course, is just literally a liquid like a wine, say a still wine that is just injected with CO2. That's also possible. Mm-hmm. Very industrial. I mean, that's wine made like Coke. So, it's not really that interesting.
Right. Like just carbonated wine.
Yeah, exactly.
This is
natural carbonation.
And and what year is this?
It's a non-vintage.
Oh, non-vintage.
We always, because we'll tend to make batches every year, mm-hmm. and then we because of the aging process, we have an average age of 3 years on the lees. So we make the wine. We've already made this year's, for example. It's October, and we've made in September. We made our base wine for the sparkling wine. When we bottle that wine, we'll add the yeast. When that wine is finished as a dry, it'll be a dry wine, and it'll be quite high in acid because you pick the grapes early. You want to preserve that acidity. That's part of the character of the finished wine. And then we'll inoculate each bottle. So we'll add yeast to each individual bottle when we bottle it, and then we'll put a crown cap on, which is like a beer cap, and then we'll just put it away. We'll put it in the same cages for 3 years, and so it just sits. But as it sits there, and the yeast is in the wine, it'll start to ferment, and that fermentation creates the pressure. That's why the bottles are so heavy. The glass is much heavier. It has to withstand the pressure.
It made me wonder about the shape of the cork as well, because the cork for champagne bottles is always different than the cork for regular wine bottles.
Yeah, that mushroom shape is probably, I'm not sure whether it's tradition or whether I'm sure there's a practical reason. The mushroom facilitates that wire shroud that holds it in place, right? Because really that cork would fly off the bottle if you didn't have that wire wrapped around it.
Right.
It's the wire that holds the cork in place. And the mushroom top, I think, makes that grip that much easier, I think, for the wire.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I hope that everyone got as much out of that as I did, because I'm like, I can't wait to drink more bubbly. Yeah. But we're going to move on, and talk about the Chardonnay, which is the wine that this came from.
All right. The Chardonnay, I'm guessing, is the second wine in the flight? Second wine in the flight, yeah. Because normally we would start with Riesling. But
we can start with Riesling.
Oh, let's do it.
We're
on the subject of Chardonnay. Okay. So this is the still version of the sparkling wine we just tried. And this is the 21 vintage of Chardonnay. And this is our CSV, so it's our top wine. It's the best of the best. Let's put it that way. In both cases, the Riesling and the Chardonnay. So Chardonnay we've been growing as long as any grape in Niagara, and it's the grape of Burgundy, of Champagne, so it's a natural for us because we have very similar growing conditions to that part of France, northeast, in the case of Chardonnay, in both cases really, the northeast part of France. So it's a northern latitude. We're actually further south here in Niagara than they are in either Champagne or Burgundy, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, we are on the 43rd parallel, which in Europe lines up with Rioja and Tuscany, believe it or not.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's a little fact that people don't appreciate, and which is why we early on realized there's no reason why we can't grow these grapes. But so that's where Chardonnay comes from.
kind of buttery on the nose, I find.
Yeah, that's what you expect from a Chardonnay, and oak is really what you're getting. I would say more than butter, but there's probably butteriness comes from malolactic fermentation, which is a secondary form of fermentation. The primary fermentation that I've been talking about in the case of the sparkling wine is a conversion of sugar to alcohol. It's a pretty straightforward process. The secondary form of fermentation I'm talking about here is malolactic. So that's a process that converts malic acid into lactic acid. So two forms of acid, you go from one to the other. Think malic is the acid associated with green apples. Lactic milk, right? So that lactic character, you said butter, that sort of range of flavors comes from that. And the what I call the sort of nuttiness, or you can call it sometimes caramel, or various descriptors for oak. Coconut is another one that you hear a lot. Those are all flavor components that come from the oak, but the butteriness comes from malolactic.
That makes sense.
Now this wine,
really lovely,
soft. Again, kind of I call it caramel on the finish.
Very much so, yeah.
Coming from that. Remember, this wine was born in oak. It was fermented in a barrel. Now, we don't use a lot of new oak. We try to dial back the amount of oak that we put our wines through, but it's very much in evidence here. The goal is to create a style of wine that is very much like people love in the case of white Burgundy. White Burgundy is kind of the gold standard for Chardonnay, and we can approach that level of style, of complexity and subtlety and just overall flavor that they get there.
To me, this is a very complex Chardonnay, because sometimes they just seem somewhat flat to me.
Mm-hmm.
But this I keep tasting more every time I have a sip.
That's the sign of a wine you want to drink, because you keep going back to it. And it'll evolve in the glass too.
Lukas is contemplating Chardonnay.
Yeah, so it's a contemplative. Like all great wines should be contemplative. They're wines you want to go back to, and a new flavor suddenly appears, and you think about it, and you have another sip and confirm that that's what you just tasted, and that's all. That's what I keep using the word complex. That's why, because when there's just one experience after another flooding your palate, you're dealing with something serious.
Because I've had some Chardonnays that have that really, have that. This one I had butter on the nose, but not so much butter when I was tasting it. But the caramel aspect I found on the second sip really came through.
Yeah.
And then there's a little bit of the green apple, and I'm like, really, every sip I was tasting something just slightly different.
And that's what wine writers try to capture when you read those flowery descriptions, right? And they go on and on. And they not just flowers, but they talk about individual types of flowers or individual types of fruit. Whether it's citric or tropical, and then they have and so you try to imagine. Mostly you read a review like that, maybe you haven't even tasted half the things they're talking about. But these experts are pulling all those hints out of the glass and writing them down.
Sometimes I think those reviews can be somewhat intimidating, though, because you're like, especially if you they're like, oh, I find this on the nose, and then you smell it and you're like, I don't smell any of that. But it's because everyone's palate and everyone has a whole different setup. And
you also it also is a discipline, and we've all been humbled by this in the business, because years ago when we opened the restaurant, and we had our chef had a great idea. He put together a whole bunch of spices, put them in a white styrofoam cup covered in tin foil and poked holes in it. And so the challenge was, okay, what do you smell? You just pick up that cup, you smell through the holes in the foil, and is it oregano? Is it all these different spices?
Tarragon or
on and on, right? Like rosemary. It's so hard to isolate which is which. Coconut. I mean, things that you think you know. When you're blind and you're just smelling, very often you get it wrong. And that's to get it right. You have to repeat it, and it's like building a muscle. You need to really focus and train yourself to identify those individual flavors.
I have a friend that often comes out here to do wine tastings, and she'll know if she likes a wine immediately from the smell.
That's understand that most of our sense of taste is olfactory. It comes from our nose, not from our palate. And the way to understand that is, number one, if you have a cold, forget it. I mean, as a winemaker, you are useless if you have a cold. But just plug your nose and taste the wine, and then taste it without plugging your nose, and you'll see the difference. Because your nose is absorbing all of these volatile elements that are in the wine. You don't even, that's happening unconsciously almost, but that is where most of the flavor that you perceive is delivered.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, now we're going to move on to the
Riesling. Yeah. So Riesling is our it's the wine that most people associate our winery with, partly because we just it sort of evolved that way. I mean, our site is really beautiful for Riesling, so that's a big part of it. It's as you know, it right in the shadow of the escarpment, with all of that minerality coming out of that wall of rock behind us. It's also in our soil. So limestone, sandstone, shale, all of those sedimentary rocks that are in the escarpment, they've been eroded over the millennia, and they end up also in our soil. And that minerality that comes from all those rocks that are mixed in our soil shows through, especially in Riesling.
Now, you have several vineyards of Rieslings, right?
Oh yeah, lots. This is the CSV, which is our top Riesling. So we make this wine by selecting. There's only 2 or 3 spots on the farm that are our go-to places. Usually they're among the oldest vines, and then we also we're over the years we've identified certain sites that just seem to be naturals for certain varieties, and so we're doing that. We've done that with Riesling for decades, and so we've kind of narrowed it down to 2 or 3 blocks of Riesling that we know every year are going to deliver what we're looking for. And so we start in the spring. We start with those same spots, those same vines, and we'll prune them accordingly. So we'll dial back the amount of fruit that we're going to get. We don't want to overcrop, especially this wine. Because we want to get a maximum flavor. So that means making sure that the yield is reasonable to low, so that we get full flavor development in the fruit. And then we farm them all through the season. We give them extra TLC that we wouldn't give to all the other Rieslings. This is the one at the top of the heap, so to speak. So it gets the most TLC throughout the season. And then in the end, we between the 2 or 3 blocks that we're kind of targeting to make this wine, we'll pick the best of the best, and that becomes the CSV.
I got a citrus nose on this one.
Yeah, I mean the trademark descriptor for Riesling, especially from the Beamsville bench, is grapefruit, but it's citric generally. Lemon, lime,
definitely.
Grapefruit.
First lemon on the tongue.
And that's the thing about Riesling. Now this is the total opposite of the wine we just had. It's unadorned, no oak, if there's malolactic, it's a tiny amount. Understand that all of our wines are naturally fermented. We're not adding commercial yeast to start the fermentation. We're allowing the natural yeast that occurs on the grapes, or even ambient here in the winery. That's what gets the fermentation started, and we just allow it to occur. That's quite a different thing from most commercial wineries.
Yeah.
But the thing with Riesling is it's stainless steel fermented. We'll do a little bit of oak in this wine especially, but it's very old oak. So we're not looking for the
punch of a new oak.
No, we're not, or that caramel and nuttiness and all those characters you get out of newer oak. The old oak barrels are really just there to give us a more oxidative, like allow a little bit of air into the vessel during and after fermentation, and that changes the character of the wine a little bit, but it doesn't impede that fruitiness that you're picking up coming out of the glass right away.
And it's interesting when you talk about this was as the CSB, because I've had your Adam Step Riesling, which is slightly sweeter,
right,
and less citrusy.
Yeah.
Does that have to do with the terrain?
Well, it's a specific site, the Adam Step, but it was the first wine that we started experimenting with natural fermentation. But the residual sugar has to be complemented by higher acidity, because if you don't have a nice crisp acidity and you leave residual sugar in the wine, then if you don't have acidity, then it comes across as sort of flabby or cloying on the palate. You don't want that. So the Adam Step might have higher acid than this wine. That might be one characteristic that makes it different. But generally speaking, we're talking about a family of wines here. We're talking about, to use this metaphor, these are all my children. They look similar, but they're different, and you can appreciate both.
Yeah.
Imagine these are like, they're all the same age though, right? They're all from the same vintage. So it's like, I've got quintuplets of Rieslings, and so they look like they belong together, but each one of them is an individual. And I guess that's what I'm saying about the difference between the CSV and the Adam Steps.
And when you here at the winery, do you have specific winemakers for specific types of wine, or is it?
For decades, when we started, it was Angelo Pavan. He just retired a few years ago, and he took on Gabe DeMarco as a student first, and then as an acolyte, and then we decided that Gabe was the guy that was going to succeed Ange. So he had about a 10-year apprenticeship, going to the vineyard every day with Ange, making the wine with him every day. And so now, but it's always one winemaker, whether it's Riesling, Chardonnay, Rosé, the Reds, whatever. They're all making the one person in charge. Obviously it's a whole team,
right?
But yeah, one winemaker for all the different wines. We're not that specialized.
Gotcha. Well, that Riesling was very, very enjoyable. Mm-hmm. What would you pair that with?
Well, it's a sipper for starters, for sure. You can do that. For me,
I would pair it with a sunny day, but
well, for Riesling, any white meat, for sure. The classic match with Riesling in places like Germany or Alsace would be sausage, like a German white meat German sausage with sauerkraut. It's a match made in heaven. The French and the Germans both make that lovely onion tart. It's a flatbread. In France, it's called what's the French word for it? A tarte flambée. And in Germany, it's what is it? Sachertorte? I forget. No, not Sachertorte. But the Germans make the same thing. That's another. It has a little bit of ham, like it could be like a prosciutto. In Italy, it would be called prosciutto, and that's another great match with Riesling. But pork, any pork served any way, is my go-to choice is Riesling, and then
fish,
Asian. Any, like, whether it's Chinese, Vietnamese, any Asian cuisine with high spice, it's the best choice, always. Better than, and certainly a red wine doesn't really work well with that cuisine, but Riesling is really the best choice. Maybe Gewürztraminer.
I was just going to say Gewürztraminer for Thai food. Yeah.
But Riesling is really what I want with anything Asian.
That's good to know. I'll keep that in mind. And now we're moving on to something a little more colorful, which would be the rosé.
Yeah, and you're a fan of this wine.
I am a fan of your rosé.
We're now into another grape, Cabernet Franc. So all of our rosés are made from Cabernet Franc only. Over the years we've experimented with Gamay, with Pinot Noir, but we've sort of settled on Cab Franc. It's also our choice for big reds, but it makes a lovely rosé.
So is there a preference as to why you would pick Cabernet as opposed to a Gamay for the rosé?
I can remember years ago, my read on a Gamay rosé was always the same. I'd stick my nose in the glass and I'd say, baloney. And I'd tell Angela, I said, I don't know, that's what I get every time I smell Gamay rosé. So like, I don't think it's the grape. Now, that may have been some quirk of how we were making it, who knows. But the thing about Cab Franc is it has this sort of beautiful, you have to think about it in the various ways you make Cab Franc. Like if it's made as but I think that when you think of the classic Cab Franc as a table wine, you think of strawberry, you think of red fruits, cherries, and so it really does have a fruitiness to it. And I think it's that we're trying to capture in the rosé, but it makes it easy to make, because in rosé you want fresh fruit,
crisp, I think,
and crisp too. Yeah, so acidity is important, and so we pick it a little bit, obviously less ripe than we would the full-bodied red that we make. So that's one thing. I mean, if you think of, I don't know if have you ever smelled Cabernet Franc ice wine or late harvest?
Yes.
Strawberries. I mean, for me, that's the descriptor beyond all others that it evokes, and that's a really concentrated version of that grape when you freeze it on the vine or partially freeze it. So I would say that that's what we're trying to capture. We're trying to capture that fruitiness in the rosé, because that's what it's about. It's about, a summer sipper that's got great appeal because of the way it smells. It's crisp on the palate. It's refreshing. I mean, even with red meat, whatever, in the summertime when it's hot, I find red wine tiring on the palate. So I go to rosé all the time.
With a burger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in my house, it's a problem because my wife doesn't like rosé when the meal calls for a full-bodied red. So we sometimes open 2 bottles. But for me, it's a question of temperature. When it's warm out, even now in the fall, it's still lovely. And we did it just the other day. I opened the rosé and I opened a Cab Franc red, full-bodied red wine for her, or Pinot Noir, I forget which it was. But anyway, so that I think that's the reason the Cab Franc works so well as a rosé here in Niagara, and we've settled on it. Remember, there's so much trial and error in our business. I mean, we've been at it for almost 40 years, and you learn but we only get to make wine once a year, so our learning curve is very long, because you make it this year. If you want to explore something different, you gotta wait another year before you can even try it. So that sort of thing makes it difficult to get to the place where you say, okay, this is the way it should be, and we got there over a course of many years with Cabernet Franc as the base for rosé.
Because I know a lot of people mix Gamay with Cabernet as well.
Or some people make rosé by adding white wine to bring the color down. I mean, there's lots of ways to make rosé.
Skin contact makes it this color, though.
Yes, so which
is a little darker than a traditional French rosé.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. So much of it is in the appearance, and the fashion today is a very light color. So we're mindful of that, and it doesn't change the flavor a lot. So we're aiming for that very that sort of blush color, because that's what the customer wants today. They're not a. In fact, I was in a discussion with a French winemaker last spring. We were visiting a winery in France. We have an import agency, and I was visiting with the winemaker, and he told me a story about his brother who was selling rosé in New York, and his brother opened up or had the newest vintage and showed the guy, his importer, he said, "Here, try some," and the guy said, "No, I don't want to try it." He said, "Well, what do you mean? You haven't tasted it?" He said, "I don't have to taste it." He said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, "It's too dark. I can't sell it at that color."
Really?
So this is a guy who's in the business selling this particular producer's wine, and he's telling him, "I don't even want to taste it because I know I can't sell it because the color's too dark."
That's interesting, because I have had rosés in this region that are darker and that have much more of a raspberry kind of flavor to them. And it's interesting because they're also on the sweeter side.
Well, that can happen, but they don't necessarily go together. It doesn't, because it's dark doesn't mean it has to be sweet.
Right.
Those could be winemaking preferences.
Or also kind of like the snobbiness that we were talking about earlier about wine.
Yes. So, but it's fashion too. I mean, is your shirt buttoned down or is it a loose collar? All these things come and go. Bell bottoms, tight pants. It changes over time. Our business
skinny
is no
ties.
Yeah, all of that, and our business has that component of that. Some of us like to try to stick to classic style or a house style that our customers associate us with. But there's always the pull of fashion in wine, like anything else. And today that fashion is for lighter colored rosés.
And this isn't the lightest rosé I've ever seen.
No.
But you had a rosé one year, it was many years ago, and it kind of had like a cotton candy kind of smell to it. Like I remember Dee Dee actually told me, she's like, "It smells like cotton candy," and I really got that from it. And it wasn't really overly sweet to the taste, but it just had that aroma of sweetness that just hit you.
But it was probably Angelo that made that wine. If you told him it smelled like cotton candy, he would be mortally offended. Because that is not a
rosé.
Or a wine like that. That is not a flavor.
Like a Jolly Rancher.
You don't want your cotton candy is one of the descriptors, for example, for Beaujolais Nouveau. It's as a disparaging descriptor.
I've never had that with the Beaujolais.
Yeah, well, the process they use, which is carbonic maceration, tends to emphasize that sort of candied character. But serious quote unquote winemakers scorn terms like or flavors like cotton candy.
Well, this rosé has that nice touch of strawberry.
Yeah, and that's what we're aiming for.
But without being sweet, it's just
right.
I can just sit there in a backyard on a hot summer day, chill this a little bit,
right?
Drink this, enjoy it even with the charcuterie board.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh, no question. Or burger you mentioned earlier.
Burger, yeah.
Very versatile.
There's never a wrong time for rosé.
No, and it's become a big category. And when we started making it way back in the 90s, a dry rosé, because in that day, fashion was White Zinfandel, if you remember, which was really sweet and cloying, but a kind of an introductory wine for people who weren't wine drinkers. Fair enough. But we made it dry right from the start, and now it's become very fashionable around the world, but it can be made seriously as a wine that you take very seriously, and that'll even age in the bottle. I mean, most rosés are really made to enjoy in their youth, released early in the spring of the following year after they're made, and enjoy them for that season, and then move on the next year to the newest rosé. That's kind of the formula for rosé consumption, because it's not generally a wine for aging. But there are some wines. We make our estate rosé will benefit from bottle age. It has a little bit more weight on the palate, more complexity. So that for the person who's looking for that, we have that too.
What's the longest that you would age a rosé?
Good question. I really don't know the answer because we haven't really We've only been making the estate. That would be the wine that we would age. Now that's under cork. This wine is under screw cap because it's intended to be consumed early.
Right.
But so to age a wine, you need to have it under cork to get the proper evolution. But we've only been making the estate rosé for a few years. It's a good question. I'll try to get that answer for you, but you have to give me a few more years.
Okay. I wouldn't know because my rosés don't tend to last that long. So
Yeah, well, you need to line them up and go do a vertical tasting and see what the evolution is from bottle age, because that's really what you're trying to understand.
Well, yours rosé is really one of my favorites in the region. It's just it's never let me down.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's nice.
I've always found it very welcoming and very drinkable, and really pairs with so many different things.
It's exactly what we're trying to do. So that's high praise. Thank you.
Well done, Len. And now we're going to move along to reds.
Yeah. So the first one, I guess, is the Pinot Noir Estate. Oh, he's got the list here for me. The Pinot Noir Estate, 2021. By the way, that rosé was the 23, so young.
Oh, very young.
Yeah.
But you know what? It didn't taste. A lot of times I find that young rosés are very thin, but that wasn't the case at all. It was still very fruit forward, but without being cloying or without being sweet. It was just.
Yeah, I just realized I misspoke. It is the estate that we were tasting.
Oh, so the one that we could age.
Yes, exactly. So that's a wine. If you want to put it down and see what happens, that would be the one to choose.
I'd have to have it in a room of my house that I don't know how to access.
Yeah.
No, that was a really, really great rosé. So now we're on to Pinot.
So this next wine is 21 Pinot Estate. So the estate wines, the ones that we call estate, are generally the top tier of that grape variety, with the exception of the CSVs, which we make only the Riesling and the Chardonnay, and that's a notch above the estate. So here we haven't ever made a CSV Pinot Noir because we're still learning grape. But this is the highest expression of our Pinot currently, and it's from a vintage which was, shall we say, challenging. You remember the fall of 21?
Rain, rain, rain.
Yes. Now the good news with Pinot is that it's the earliest ripener, so we were actually able to get the Pinot picked before the skies opened up. So both of these wines really surprised me, coming from that vintage, because as winemakers, all we remember is what you said: rain.
Yeah,
we literally could not even drive tractors in the vineyard. It was the wettest harvest I have ever experienced in 40 years as a grape grower.
And people lost a lot of grapes that year.
They did, yeah. So that comes back to how you start the season. I mean, what we do is we plan for the worst and we hope for the best. That means we reduce crop, we do all the things necessary, assuming that the worst is going to happen during the season. And then if that doesn't happen, we're going to make glorious wine. If it does happen, we're ready for it. And in this case, we were able to make this wine, which I find astonishing.
It's a really deep color for a rosé.
Oh, it's not a rosé.
Not a rosé, for a Pinot. Yeah, I was going to say,
but it's our estate.
For a Pinot. It is a deep color for a Pinot.
Yeah, if we looked at our entry-level Pinot, which you can buy in the LCBO, it wouldn't have this deep a color. The reason for that is that, remember, it's just like I was saying about the Riesling and the Chard. We pick the block that's going to be the Pinot Noir estate. I can tell if we were at the vineyard, I could point out the two spots where this wine comes from. And then we prune them more severely. We thin the crop more. We completely take all the leaves off in the fruiting zone, so they're getting maximum sun exposure. They're getting maximum aeration, so that there's less likelihood of mold and mildew taking hold in the fruiting zone. We do all the things that lead to this, which is the color you're looking at.
It's got kind of a plum.
Yeah, that's a
sort of
classic descriptor for Pinot.
The plum.
Yep.
The plum on the nose, for sure.
And it's more concentrated. The color is repeated in the nose, right? It's not as sort of fresh and delicate as you would expect from a Pinot. There's more in there. You want to go back to it again and again because you're exploring flavors that are just sort of emerging.
They're kind of like bubbling.
Yeah, they're there. You know they're there, but you have to go back to it and figure out what it is they're telling you, because there's just more stuffing in this wine.
Yeah,
and it's because of the way we farm the grapes, and we choose the vines.
Because I don't taste plum at all. More of like I hesitate to say cranberry, but it's kind of because it's a little on the tart.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little tartness coming in.
Yeah.
So it could be cranberry-ish, but it's nice, fruit forward, but without being like that punch in your face that I get from a Cabernet.
Right. Now it's not that punch is probably tannin you're talking about, which is really, it coats your tongue. It's like sandpaper on your tongue.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that here, though. You don't expect tannin so much in a Pinot, and yet it's here. So this wine, the other thing about it, it's a baby. 21. It's been in the bottle for a few years, but for a wine of this caliber, it really needs bottle age. If you could come back to this wine in, say, 5 or 10 years. I'm just saying. I said if. It'll evolve in the bottle, and there'll be whole new layers of flavor that come from that process that you're not getting here. Here you're getting forward fruit, you're getting a little bit of tannin. Mm-hmm. Those tannins will soften. The fruit will evolve. You'll get more complex, not aromatics, but sort of bouquet characteristics. So then you're going to be into the realm of things like sweaty saddle and barnyard is for Pinot. That's the descriptor that they always use.
Barnyard?
Yeah, literally barnyard. And I see the thought balloon above your head there, and I know what you're thinking. And so let me tell you this story, because I remember being at a tasting of Pinot, and there was the fellow leading the tasting was reading from an old English wine critic who had this beautiful description of what Pinot Noir tasted and smelled like. And it went on for a whole paragraph, and every floral image you can imagine. And at the end of it all, this long poem to Pinot, he ended up by saying, in a word, to be truly a Pinot Noir, a wine must taste and smell like shit. So it's that earthiness. Barnyard means earthy. It means a little bit of that sort of.
I kind of feel like hay, like
the
smell of hay and the smell
of. Like in the spring when the farmers are spreading manure, it's an off-putting smell, but it's also sweet. There's a sweetness.
There is a sweetness to it because.
So that's, I think, what they're trying to capture or connote when they say barnyard with Pinot.
Like earthiness with sweetness.
Earthiness with sweetness.
Kind of peaty, like the peatiness of.
Yes. But that sounds more like Scotch.
That sounds like Scotch, yeah. But I know, because where I live, there's vineyards all around me, and I get that smell in the spring,
right,
and at the end of the fall as well.
I remember having a conversation with a farmer years ago who can you believe this? Only farmers would have a conversation like that, where we were making distinctions between chicken shit, cow shit, pig shit, and the manure. When it's spread in the field, you know which is which,
right?
And we had this whole. It was like we were talking about wine. So that's a long digression on barnyard, but Pinot, the classic descriptor for Pinot is barnyard, which means earthiness, a complexity that's almost impossible to capture in words. And that's why this is the go-to grape for all winemakers worldwide. Every winemaker wants to make a great Pinot. Burgundy is the holy grail. Red Burgundy is the holy grail.
Well, I feel like the bench area is so great for Pinots as well.
We
have some spectacular Pinots in this area.
Yeah. So that barnyard, but the point I want to make is that it comes with bottle age, because we're getting, this is a baby. It's 21 vintage, so that's 3 years ago. It's still a baby. This wine will not come into its own for another 5 or 10 years, unfortunately. So you're just going to have to buy a case and lock it in your cellar and leave it there come back to it in 5 or 10
I have to
years.
lock it in your cellar because if it was
Yeah.
in mine, I
Yeah.
know I'm going to drink it.
That's unfortunately, wines of this caliber, they need that extra bit of bottle age, and if you give them that, it really does reward.
It's really,
effort.
though I will say it tastes beautiful right now.
It's true, yes.
Like
but
I could have this at Thanksgiving with turkey and be very happy.
yes, agreed. We're selling it for that reason.
Yeah.
But if you want to understand what it can become, then you need to give it bottle age.
Then I'll come see you in 5 years.
Yeah. While we're on that subject, I know I'm probably overstaying my welcome.
Oh no, it's fine. We have another bottle to get. We have another.
Okay. Well, we can. It'll be the same subject with the next one. Do you want to go to that one next? Or?
Yeah.
So the next one is Cabernet Franc, same vintage, 21, and it's. I've been talking about it in the case.
Now
of
this
the
one
Rosé.
has a very peppery nose.
Yeah. This is that's a characteristic we're looking for. This is the Dolomite. I didn't pour the estate because it's available, but it is so tight right now. By tight, I mean it's tannic. It's closed a bit. We would probably be best to decant it and leave it for an hour or even overnight before we taste it. So I just wanted to have something that was more approachable right now, and that's this wine. So this is the Dolomite, which is the second level below the estate.
What does the Dolomite mean? Is that the soil?
Well, the word is really derived from the dolomitic limestone. So the limestone that forms the escarpment, at least the cap rock of the escarpment, is dolomitic limestone, and so we just chose that as the descriptor for this line of wines that we make. We just wanted to connote the fact that our wines are grown in soils that are full of
minerals
and specifically limestone. And around the world, limestone is much prized as a site for grape growing. And so we're celebrating the fact that our site is full of limestone. So Cabernet Franc, I mentioned earlier, of course, this is one of the three great reds of Bordeaux, the others being Cab Sauv and Merlot. And we have tried all three in our vineyard, and we ended up settling on this because we just found it much more adaptable to our site. And there are reasons for the other two not quite making the grade. Cab Sauv isn't a reliable ripener every year. And Merlot, although we can ripen it, is very susceptible to our harsh winters. And so for those two reasons, we decided to move away from those varieties and focus entirely on
the sturdier grape.
Cab Franc. And Cab Franc also just makes great wine. We discovered when we finally had the right clones in the right site, it was obvious. I mean, what I've found over the years as a grape grower is that you're going to make great wine even before you've made it, because you've got a vine that's producing the perfect crop without a lot of intervention. It doesn't need a lot of the things that you would otherwise do to achieve quality, because
like the cropping.
It puts out just exactly the amount of crop that it can ripen. The clusters are loose. The skins are fairly thick, not like Pinot. So it just was a beautiful vine to grow. And so, sure enough, the wines were also beautiful when we finally.
It's a very
made
beautiful color to this wine as well.
Yeah.
Such a dark shade of burgundy almost.
In the case of all of these big reds, typically they need more time on the vine, so that they need an extended season. We don't always have that, and so we needed to find a grape that we could count on ripening every year, and that again that's Cab Franc. And on our site we don't get frost usually until at least the middle of November. So in a cool year, like this was a cool year, and I'm frankly shocked how great the Cab Francs are from 21, because there was that long period where we were just in despair.
Rain.
And they were just hanging out there in the rain, in the mud, in the water standing between the rows. And we wondered if we'd ever get out there to pick them. But they just hung in there. And then as things dried up and we got into November, we were able to make this wine. And I'm truly shocked, but also I feel vindicated that we chose Cab Franc because we knew that it could hang late into the season.
Hardy grape.
Yeah, and it delivered. So if it can deliver in a year like this, it delivers all the more in a better growing season.
When's the typical time you would harvest a Cab Franc? Like October?
Well, late October probably. But if we need to stretch the season into November, we can, because the leaves are still green. Once we get a frost and the leaves turn brown, there's no more photosynthetic activity. The only incremental ripening you get would be from desiccation. In other words, if the berries, if the water evaporates out of the berries and they raisin, you're going to get more concentration, but not more ripening. So there's no point leaving grapes on the vine beyond the first frost. So the challenge is to have an extended growing season, have a site which will allow you, if you need it, to extend the growing season into November, and we can do that every year.
It's getting warmer all the time too, so
yeah,
it's becoming easier.
Right.
But this has a nice peppery, I find it has a very peppery aroma, but it doesn't taste peppery at all.
It's funny you use that descriptor. That's a descriptor I use for Gamay more than Cab Franc, but I see what you're saying.
Well, we have different palates.
One of the things with this, like the Pinot, is that, and Niagara Bordeaux Reds generally, age surprisingly well.
I get a lot of black cherry on the
I do too.
At the back of my tongue on this.
You pick up the tannin there too, right? Like it's the most tannic of all the wines we've tasted today, and that's no surprise. It's the darkest color, more skin contact. Those are thick skins. We want to extract that flavor and that color, and the price you pay is that you're also extracting tannins, which is not a bad thing because it gives the wine longevity. So this wine, again, will go for 10, even 20 years. But it'll change. The evolution is quite different, and that's what happens in Bordeaux. I mean, the great Chateau of Bordeaux really express themselves with that much bottle age, and that's why they're so prized, because they can be enjoyed young, as we can this wine right now, or the Pinot. But what connoisseurs look for is the change in flavor that occurs with bottle age, that is quite different.
Is there a point that it's been too long?
Oh yeah, I mean, wines. Think about it. If you think about it as a curve on a graph, these wines are all on the upside. They're going up toward the peak quality, and then there can be a long plateau, or the graph might sort of flatten out for a long period of time. But at some point, it'll go the other way. Yeah, so you want to avoid that. But usually, if it's a wine that you know will age a long time, like 20 years, for example, the Rieslings for sure, both reds, absolutely. Chardonnay less so, because it's just not the nature of Chardonnay to last that long on a bottle.
And obviously a rosé, no.
I didn't answer that question.
You did not.
Remember.
So I'm just
I don't know. It may well. I don't know. But the thing about bottle age, if I can just digress for a minute, is that it's Matt Kramer is a famous wine writer, and he wrote a book called Making Sense of Wine years ago, and I had the good fortune of meeting him decades ago here, and he has this concept of transformation. The point he makes in that book, and that he's made over the years, is great wines don't age, they transform. And when he said that to me, I said, Matt, what do you mean? I don't understand. I hadn't read his book. And so we were doing a flight of Rieslings. It happened at that time. And there was 5, 6, 7, and it was in the 90s. So we were going, I remember I think the first wine or the last wine in the flight was the 88. So we went, say, from 94 to 88 or something like that. And we were talking about this concept of transformation. And I didn't understand what he was saying. It was a very philosophical kind of a theory. And so we were going through the flight. We got to the last wine, and he was still trying to explain it to me. And then he said, bingo, this wine has transformed. That was the 88. Let's say it was 7, 8 years old by then. He said, all of these wines, they were all made by the same winemaker from the same site, same vines. He said, all of these wines are on their way to becoming this wine. This is the wine they truly are. So that if you really want to understand the essence of a wine, then you need to wait for the moment when it becomes what it was intended to be. And that's what happens with bottle age. But it's not just aging. It's there's a point at which it's like somebody throws a switch and says, okay, now you truly are getting what it was on its way to becoming, and now it has become that thing.
So patience truly is a virtue when it comes to wine.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I don't have that.
And if you taste a great wine that has been given that opportunity to become itself like that, you know as soon as you smell it and taste it, it's magical.
I've had some wines from places in this area that didn't age well, though.
Oh yeah, that of course.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of care to build a wine for that journey.
Because I was at a friend's house and she opened up a bottle of the 2017 from a vineyard that I won't name, and it tasted like vinegar.
Well, that's just a flawed wine then. I mean, vinegar is volatile acidity.
Is that because of maybe like there was something when I had talked to Vadim at Casaba once about it, and he said sometimes it's the cork.
Could be the cork too, yeah. I mean, cork taint is very, not common, but it happens. I mean, I took a bottle of this one, the Cab Franc Estate. We were down in Massachusetts a few weeks ago. We were there for a week. I thought I'll bring some nice wine. And one of the nicest wines I brought was the Cab Franc Estate, and I pulled the cork, and it was corked. It was spoiled by the cork. The wine otherwise would have been fine, but cork. It's called TCA, the compound that occurs naturally in. Remember, cork is the bark of a tree, so you're dealing with something that can be spoiled,
like a barnyard thing.
Yeah. So. But that's a scourge of the wine business, and the way to avoid it. But it's only under cork that the wine ages the way I'm talking about. We've done experiments, and we've done Riesling under screw cap and under cork, and gone back 6, 7, 8 years later, and the Riesling under cork evolved, had the kind of transformation I talked about, and the Riesling under screw cap was in freeze frame. It was the same as it was when we bottled it, and that's not what great wines are about. Great wines are about evolving.
Right. Yeah. So, note to any listener: if you buy a screw cap, don't think that you can age it, but it's not going to change the flavor of the wine.
That's a controversial statement that I would make. There are winemakers who believe that screw caps do permit evolution.
But how, if they don't have the cork that actually adds to that? Would you?
It's this minute amount of air transfer that occurs through the cork that contributes to that evolution. Whereas if you have a perfect seal, a hermetically sealed vessel, you don't get that, and that's the difference. Now, there are winemakers who would dispute what I'm saying. So I'm just to be fair to them. But my experience, and I was a skeptic. Every time I have a corked wine, I bring it back to the winery and slam it on the counter in the lab, and I tell the guys, "What are we doing? We're selling lemons to our customers. Like, this is wrong. We got it." And so, because there was a time when we thought screw caps were the answer, but after we did those experiments, it became clear that we won't get the evolution that we're all trying to achieve.
And why did screw caps come about? Because I had heard that there was a cork shortage at one point, or was it just that
They've been around when I started in the business a long time ago. They were when we started VQA. I was involved at the very beginning of VQA. We actually had a rule that you could not, if it was a VQA wine, it had to be under cork, because we were trying to elevate the industry and elevate our image, and corks had to do with that. We now permit screw caps, because in those days, screw caps were associated with jug wine,
Boone's Farm,
Gallo,
yeah.
Hardy Burgundy, whatever.
Right.
What's his Richard's Wild? What is it? The Constellation brand. Forget what it was called, but named after
the ones
guy.
that you drank when you were in high school.
Yeah. Richard's Wild Irish Rose.
Oh my God.
That is a wine that made the Sands family wealthy, and now they own Robert Mondavi Winery, among many others. So
Wow.
Humble beginnings. But the point is, those wines were capped in screw caps, so the image was down market. So for many years, nobody touched, serious wine drinkers would never buy a screw cap wine, because that was what it connoted. Today, that's not the case anymore. And we have the Aussies and the Kiwis to thank for that. They were the ones who said, enough with cork taint. There's no reason why we can't use this closure. And then the rest of the world followed.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
You've been such a wealth of knowledge today, Len.
Oh, thank you.
I really have enjoyed the wine tasting.
Mm-hmm.
I've enjoyed hearing so many stories. I will appreciate champagne in a completely different way now, and I have you to thank for that. And I'm sure our listeners do as well. So
I'm glad to share it.
Thank you so much for being a guest on Spill the Wine, and for allowing us to visit you at Cave Springs. It's been an absolutely fantastic experience. And listener, if you're ever in this area, you've got 2 different locations you can visit them at. You can the tasting room here in Jordan, or the vineyards, which are in Beamsville. Both spectacular locations. So be sure to visit the show notes for more information on Cave Springs. And also, don't forget to like and follow Spill the Wine as well. And if you have any topics or suggestions or more questions for Len, you can definitely send us an email at podcastspillthewine@gmail.com. That's podcastspillthewine@gmail.com. So now we will say cheers and enjoy your next glass of Cave Springs.